So, how's the market? In January, it's always a fun time to do the market stats because you've got the whole year in front of you. This year for 2026, James and I have decided to do our market reports together because we think, because we've been doing this for a while. I have my 25th anniversary this year, and James has been in the market for 8 years. And the unique Seven. Okay.
7 to 8 years.
7 to 8 years. Close enough. The unique dynamic we have is that I tend to work with sellers and he tends to work with buyers. And I tend to work with an older clientele and he tends to work with a different generation that's slightly younger. So this gives you a whole bunch of perspectives to look at when we're talking about market stats. And the thing about market stats is perspective, because there's only wisdom in the numbers when you can put perspective to them.
The bigger picture. And we have 4 charts for you today. And the reason we're using these charts in particular is to show the perspective. So on all these charts, we're going to be looking from present day all the way back to 2013. Let's start with average price. And again, we're looking at the Toronto area here, both detached, condo, townhouse, all property types within Toronto. We're sitting at an average price just below $1 million at $965,000. The peak was April of 2022 at $1.25 million. How does average price impact a seller these days?
Well, there again, it's perspective. It depends what the motivation of the seller is. Given the interest rate runoffs and stuff that we've had, there are some people in financial distress. So their take on the average price is they have to sell anyway, and so they're going to be more open to negotiation. Whereas if you have a seller that is downsizing, which is a large portion of our population, an increasing portion, they're going to remember how busy the market was before. And they know that when they leave now, oftentimes this is the equity they're taking out of the market. And they don't have to do it at any particular time. So they may choose to either test the market and, when I list my properties, I make sure they understand the market conditions so that the pricing is realistic. But then they can decide, whether or not the offers that they're receiving make sense for them.
Great point. And from a buyer's perspective, it's obvious to say that buyers love purchasing at a lower price. I think the more important thing to look at here, though, is going to be the relationship between interest rates and price. As I mentioned before, April 2022 was the first month during the rate hiking cycle. And you can see how much it really does affect price, because 80% of buyers are buying with a mortgage. And so what you're looking at is that monthly payment figure, not so much the purchase price amount. And I think the important thing to take away here is, yes, you might be paying a higher rate now, but you lock in that purchase price forever. Your rate will change, focus more on getting a great price, and you can negotiate better rates in the future.
Yeah. And, you can never time the market. So if you're a buyer and you're now in a position to buy, don't sit on the fence waiting for the bottom, because if you hit the bottom, you've already missed it. And
you got the luxury of being able to go back in time 3 to 4 years and buy a house for that price now.
So yeah, and the interest rates have come down to a reasonable level and they're slated to be stable for this year, relatively speaking, unless the economy does something on.
Moving on.
Yes. Okay.
The next chart we have here is transaction volume. Transaction volume is simply the number of homes that sell. I shouldn't say homes, the number of properties in Toronto that sell in any given month. Right now, for the month of January of 2026, 1,035 properties sold in Toronto. You can see that December and the winter is typically the lowest number of sales that we have throughout the year, and the highest is going to be May. How does that affect somebody's listing strategy right now?
So I often get the question, when's the best time to list? And as you can see from this chart, the sales cycle is pretty cyclical. And the peak of the market is going to be anywhere between March and July, most often, as you said, May. Which surprises a lot of sellers because they all think they want to list their house in the summer when the garden looks great
and everyone's on vacation.
Warm out, but then everyone's on vacation. There's no one there to buy it. So the best time to list is just as the sales are picking up. So that would be March.
From a visual standpoint, this is what we were looking at. So this is going to be, December or January, and almost every single time you'll notice that valley is going to be the December month. We were talking, and ideally from a listing standpoint, you don't want to wait till May to get your home on the market. At that point, you've missed the boat. So we're thinking usually somewhere between February, March, and in rare exceptions, January, because we do have peak months in March. Majority of the time it's May, sometimes March. You got to be ready late January if you're thinking about listing for that.
If you want to catch the highest sales volume time, you can list any time. The second best time would be September, October, once you pass the spring season.
It's this little blip here.
It's
so
the
you
little
can see
blips, yeah.
we just have another pickup in volume into September before we drop off into the winter.
But this funny little blip down here, that's the peak summer. So don't wait until your garden's in full bloom.
And from a buyer's perspective, how does transaction volume impact you? Obviously, less sales means less competition. Something to keep in mind, though, is that not only do you have to think about your competition, you have to think about your supply. So if there's less competition, it's usually because there's less homes for sale. The key word being usually. So that's why I like to look at this ratio, which is the months of inventory. Months of inventory is simply how many active listings are there relative to how many sales are occurring. And you can see that during sort of the peak in 2022, we were below 1 month, which means simply if we got no new listings, we would have run out of properties to sell in 1 month. That month of inventory figure is now at 7, which means if we got no new listings, which we're getting plenty of, we would have 7 months of homes before we ran out of properties to sell. How does this figure impact a seller?
Well, I think the other thing to understand about this figure is this is the figure that we all use to determine whether it's a buyer's or a seller's market.
Great
because point. As you talked about, the trough here of 1 month, when there was only 1 month of inventory, all the buyers were clamoring because they thought they may never be able to buy anything. Now that there's 7 months of inventory and they have more choice, they take their time. And so putting that in perspective for seller is understanding whether you're in a buyer or a seller's market and how much negotiation and how much negotiation power you're going to have.
And to measure that, I don't think there's a generally accepted principle, but I like to say below 2 is a seller's market and above 4 is a buyer's market. And so it's a great buyer's market right now. Lastly, we have one more, which is going to be the average days on market, which is just another measure of buyers versus sellers market. It's quite simply take all the listings. How many days on average will it stay on the market before it sells? We're currently up at 46, I believe, up from a low of 11 during the peak.
At 11 during the peak was houses were coming out, multiple offers, and they were selling within the week. So you really had to be on it and quick.
Well, a simple way of looking at this is that half of the homes are going to sell in less than 11 days and half are going to be above, which is the same concept here. Half of the homes are taking more than 1.5 months to sell.
When it comes to working with sellers and days on market, I use that stat when I'm sitting down with a seller to give them a realistic expectation of how long it's going to take to sell their house. Because those stats are also run by neighborhood, by type of house. So we can be, pretty confident that this is the average for your type of house in this neighborhood. And what that means is if we pass that time, and we look at, how many showings we're having, how many offers we're having, you may want to adjust the price because that's going to be your indication that your house is priced properly. And one question that buyers will often ask their agent is, how long has this been on the market? And if the house has been on the market for a while, they may offer a little less, thinking that there may be some stress going on the seller's side. So days on market is actually the enemy of a home's price. So we look at that quite closely.
Thank you all for tuning in. These were January's numbers. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to touch base. If not, we'll see you again next month.
Have a great month.